Let's move on to topic number 2. Now, maybe this is your experience, maybe not, but there are certain research projects that you do because you want to, and you're acutely aware that your own desire and choice is fueling the completion of the project. There are other projects that seem to be impelled by some strange, mysterious outside force. You may not personally be greatly interested in the topic, but obviously something in the universe is asking that it be done. That's clear because circumstances keep shoving it in your face. And you dare to serve the topic, not to serve your own agenda. So that's my research on what is called eefing. So what is eefing? Well, all shall be revealed. First of all, leading out of the first part of today's talk, let's start with Cliff Edwards. A fellow named Larry Kiner created the definitive work about Edwards, a biodiscography, and he states that Edwards called his wordless vocalizing eefin, or to be more formal, eefing. Now, Kiner was a conscientious and knowledgeable aficionado, but not a scholar, and he did not give a citation for that claim. He probably found it in an interview, but I have not been able to locate the source. Nevertheless, it's widely accepted that Edwards called his technique that we've been witnessing eefing. Now, when I was doing my dissertation research, I was at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, reading the script for the 1906 musical comedy, The Red Mill. It was also revived on Broadway in an even longer run in the mid-40s, and I saw it performed by the Light Opera of Manhattan in the 1980s. So it remained a long-standing favorite in the USA. It originally starred Dave Montgomery and Fred Stone. Montgomery and Stone were a song and dance comedy pair who became famous in the 1902 in the roles of the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow in the original stage musical of The Wizard of Oz. The Red Mill was their follow-up vehicle, and they played two Americans stranded in picturesque Holland with the symbolic names of Con Kidder and Kid Connor. In the middle of the first act, the two stars joined with the lead soubrette to perform a song called Whistle It. It's a comedy song by the score's composers, Victor Herbert and lyricist, librettist Henry Blossom. The idea of the lyric is that when you want to swear, shout, or curse, instead you should whistle to blow off steam. The lyric, I wish some people would follow that advice today. The lyric is just a series of unrelated short stanzas on this concept, and here's an example of one of the stanzas from a 1950s recording by chorus. There isn't any word a girl can use when she is mad. A man can say most anything, it doesn't sound so bad. She is bound to be a perfect lady, and she mustn't make a sound. But just let something happen when there's nobody around. So in the printed version of this song, there's 3 published stanzas. But the script of the New York Public Library, which has many hand annotations, gives 2 more stanzas on a handwritten page, presumably Henry Blossom's own hand, and then handwritten directions for a 6th and 7th and maybe 8th repeat of the melody. The 6th refrain gives the instructions to whistle. Makes sense? The 7th gives this instruction: Eepha-Soffa-Dill. So I'm there in the library, and there the page ends. And then you turn the page, and at the top of the next page it says, again, refrain 6, Eepha-Soffa-Dill. followed by the directions Crazy Dance by Kahn, in other words, by Fred Stone, in the role of Kahn Kidder. So I'm saying to myself, what is that? And then in brackets, I write this note to myself, is this a word meaning scatting? Is this where Cliff Edwards got the word eefing from? Well, after 11 years of further research, I discovered that yes, there was a relationship between Eepha-Soffa-Dill and Cliff Edwards' eefing. And I've told all about this in my 1917 article in the American Music Journal. I'll give you some sense of it tonight. I found the phrase Eepha-Soffa-Dill in about a dozen variations over a span of historical references from 1893 to 1940. It all starts with Fred Stone's brother, Stone of Montgomery. His brother was Ed Stone, and Fred and Ed performed together when they were very young, but then they split up, and Ed Stone eventually teamed up with a vaudeville partner, Frank Williamson, very active in the vaudeville circuit at the end of the 1800s. And as the two of them, who according to Williamson in later decades, were the originators of what they called Eepha-Soffa-Dill and Eephing, sometime around 1893, when they formed their act. Frank Williamson made this claim twice in print, once in 1918 and once in 1924. And there are certain indications that Williamson's claim had validity, and I've given those details in my article. Another connotation of the word eefing is any song or performance that uses the nonsense syllables Eepha-Soffa. For instance, the Eepha-Soffa phrase was used by George M. Cohan twice in his songs. This famous turn of the 20th century American composer and performer wrote Rag Babe, also known as Cohan's Rag Babe, for the show The Yankee Prince from the spring of 1908. The song was the grand finale of this three-act musical comedy introduced by Cohan himself as the titular Yankee Prince, and as well as by his sister Josephine Cohan and the chorus. Here's a 1908 recording of it by the prolific recording artist Arthur Collins. Verse and refrain. Cohen's so underestimated. He wrote so many wonderful songs that I've forgotten. Cohen actually used the Eepha-Soffa phrase later in 1908 as well in his fall show, The American Idea. It didn't star him. At the end of the verses of a second act finaletto, in which was a song called The American Ragtime. Now Cohen was actually well acquainted with Ed Stone. They had the supposed originator, co-originator of the Eepha-Soffa and Eefing. The two had played on the same vaudeville bill and even played baseball together back in 1900. So in addition to these two George M. Cohan songs, I found 6 other popular music compositions, mostly instrumentals, some instrumentals, mostly songs, not written for musical productions, just independent songs and instrumentals, that incorporated variations on this Eepha-Soffa syllables into their lyrics, or in the case of instrumental works, into their titles. And they range from 1903 to 1940. One of these songs was interpolated into a Broadway show. This was the song, When the Grown-Up Ladies Act Like Babies, I Gotta Love 'Em, That's All, of 1914. Al Jolson introduced this rhythmic comedy song to the Broadway stage in the Schubert show at the Winter Garden, Dancing Around. And here's an excerpt with the Eepha-Soffa phrase, which is inserted into the middle of the refrain, sort of like a jazz break. So, of course, Al Jolson, the greatest musical comedy star of his generation.
I can't realize that grown-up lady When they walk like they talk like they.
And incidentally, Jolson was, during the first couple years of his recording career, 1911 through 1913, one of the main proponents of nonsense syllable singing on record at that time. And he occasionally did it for brief interjections right into the mid-20s. So my guess is that what Montgomery and Stone did in the Red Mill number in 1906, Whistle It, that puzzled me so was similar to what Gene Greene did. Eugene Greene, was a star singer of the Ragtime-era in vaudeville, and his publicity often dubbed him the king of ragtime or emperor of ragtime. And when he sang his theme song, King of the Bungaloos, which he co-wrote, he created 3 special refrains after the normal first refrain of the song. And he uses many different nonsense syllable devices during these special material. So here he is in an excerpt from one of his 6 recordings of King of the Bungaloos. I should just say, it's the story of the song. The protagonist has discovered that his ancestors were royalty in Africa and plans to go back and live a life of royal ease there. But we won't hear much of that in this excerpt. Right. Now, that goes by pretty quickly. He uses a lot of different sounds there. And so was this the kind of thing that they meant in the script of The Red Mill when it said Eepha-Soffa-Dill? Was this what Montgomery and Stone were doing in The Red Mill? That's my guess. This is the closest we can come in time and plausibility to what that direction meant to Montgomery and Stone at that time and that place. So, we'll come on a little bit later on in the 20th century. There's yet another denotation of the verb eefing, closely related. In the mid-1920s, a little boy in the state of Tennessee learned a technique from his uncle that was called hodeling. This was Jimmie Riddle, and he grew up to be a prominent sideman in the world of country music. He's a multi-instrumentalist, and he particularly specialized in the piano and harmonica. In 1963, he's now middle-aged, the country record producer Bob Moore, who was a bassist, famous bassist, wrote a novelty song called Little Eefin Annie, which went on to chart on the pop charts somewhere around 63, I think, on the top 100. And of course, Little Eefin Annie is a pun on Little Orphan Annie, which doesn't have anything else in relationship to. In this track, the African-American soul balladeer Joe Perkins sort of narrates the song and sings parts of it. And he's telling a story about his girlfriend, Annie, who stutters. And Jimmie Riddle supplies the stuttering, which is the part that Moore clearly considered to be the eefing. Here's an excerpt of that song.
Well, I took Annie right, and we went to the park. We ended up in a love play, sitting in the dark. I asked Annie for a kiss, and I looked in her eyes. And by the time she answered, I already kissed her twice, but she went. Sure was nice.
Okay, that doesn't give you much sense of it, but I'll have a little bit. Jimmie Riddle was caught on the recording studio at the end of a session by Mike Seeger and Almeida Riddle, and forced to record a little demonstration and explanation of his what he called hoodling. But by the time the 1963 hit had become famous, everybody was calling it eefing. So he will give this demonstration. This is widely available on the internet. We'll listen to a bit of it.
You start out with the letter E. You say E. I say E, and then you go, and then you kind of gasp, real slow. Ease, eyes, ease, 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 eyes, oh, ease, learn that, Daddy.
Where in the heck did that ever come from, do you expect?
My uncle, on my mother's side, taught me when I was a little boy. He used to do it for me.
I guess
He called it hodeling. They call it eefing now.
Mm-hmm.
And he got it from somebody to dance up in Dyersburg, Tennessee.
I'll tell you, that little interview has led to so many false reports on the internet that it like fills up a whole page. Anyway, so Riddle went on to become a regular on the long-running country music-themed television series Hee Haw from the late 1960s until his death in 1982. From 1970 onwards, he and another cast member, Jackie Phelps, are often featured in brief musical episodes in which Phelps did body percussion and Riddle did his eefing. Again, something fondly remembered by a couple generations of television watchers.
Well, now that's eefin.
So, how did this word eefing get connected to what Riddle learned 40 years earlier into the name hodeling? This is one of the big unanswered questions. But there are some connections. For one, both Gene Greene, who used the phrase Eepha-Soffa-Dill in his theme song, and Cliff Edwards, who reportedly called his nonsense syllable singing eefing, both of them recorded brief passages somewhat similar to what Jimmie Riddle did. Here's Gene Greene in his 1917 recording of an Irving Berlin song called From Here to Shanghai. And these are just so fleeting. I hope you can catch them. It's part of a larger nonsense syllable solo in the recording. Here it is. So startling when he goes back into this singing words. It's like a completely different timbre, different vocal production. And here's Cliff Edwards. Again, this is so fleeting. It's so fleeting. Cliff Edwards was well known for singing St. Louis Blues, but he didn't record it till 1934. This is his first of 3 times getting it on recordings with a group called the Eaton Boys. And he just uses it very briefly in one of the breaks. Near the end of this. It's not very long, but he uses that vocalized inhalation, which is so unusual. I'm not universally familiar with, global vocal techniques, but certainly in the Western music that I have pretty good experience of in a wide number of genres, that vocalized inhalation is very unusual, and to be used percussively like that. So it's not as clear an example, but one film episode of Cliff Edwards also has just right at the tail end, or near the tail end, just a little bit, a few seconds of something similar to this. It's a 1930 movie musical called Doughboys, starring Buster Keaton, who's featured making music with Cliff Edwards. In this clip, they were good friends. And it's set in World War I, and they're doughboys out on the fronts, trying to entertain themselves.
Doughboy,
So, we swung back to Cliff Edwards and his contribution to the American musical on stage and screen. We can see that this idea of eefing and the Eepha-Soffa nonsense phrase links these different genres, links jazz to country, to Broadway, to Hollywood, and it's a really interesting thread that spans across American popular music. So anyway, let's go on to topic number 3, but it's spinning out of the other topics.